Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepytime Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we go any further, I need to have a little bit of a chat with some of you folks. This is aimed mostly at people who have been with me for a while and who are definitely finding the show useful. If you are finding it useful and you have the means, I'd like to ask if you can provide me with a little bit of support. You can help me to grow the show by supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. My first priority is to help cover some costs. Basically, my costs are now covered thanks to the new patrons I've had sign up recently, and I'm no longer out of pocket every month, so thank you very much to all of you. I do want to do a little bit of an equipment upgrade. I need to get a new microphone and some other stuff, which will help improve the sound quality. A lot of you have stuck with me through the way the show sounds now, but I think if I improve the first impression, I can get more people to stick around when they discover it, and I can help more people to improve their lives. So if you can, and provide some support, that would be much appreciated. Ultimately, in the long run, I really would like to do this full time. I know that's years away, but I would like to be able to do more episodes and spend a little bit more time doing more creative stuff. So that would be pretty amazing. Just so you know, I do have plans for the future with this show. And to help me fulfill those plans, the short term and the long term, every dollar helps. So I have a $1 level on my Patreon, which, if you can spare that much, it really is helpful. Even with only $1 contribution, you do get some benefits. I have the catnap episodes, which I play on Radio Public, so you will receive those as any patron at any level, and I'll also give a shout out on an episode, as well as list your name on the website. If you sign up at the $5 level, you get all of that stuff, plus you get promo-free and story-only edits of the show. So at the $5 level, you get the shout-out, you get the catnaps, and you also get promo-free and story-only edits of the show, as well as a bonus to new patrons at the $5 level. Probably up until the end of November, I'm going to be sending people a handwritten postcard. I've got together some quite fun touristy South African themes postcards, and I'm sending them out to the $5 patrons. I was sent out my first couple of weeks ago, and the people who sign up in October are going to get theirs sent to them towards the end of this month as well. So if you would like something fun in the mail, sign up at $5. And also, as an incentive, if I reach $50 by the end of November, I will do a bonus video episode for patrons. That episode will be released as a bonus audio episode in the main feed to all listeners as well, probably in January. On the subject of Patreon and shoutouts, I've got a few new supporters on Patreon, which is very exciting. My basic costs as they are now are covered. I would like to upgrade a few services and buy some equipment, so I'm just beginning of the process. But I've got some new people signed up, which is fantastic. Now I'm waiting to hear back from a couple of people. I won't share any names without explicit consent. So while I wait to hear from them, please folks pop me a message so I can give you your shoutouts. I will say hi to Jess from Vermont, who's one of the new patrons. She also has a message for Kara. She says she hopes that you're having a good night. And Kara, thanks for joining us as well. I hope you have a good night as well. Jess also has been a cheerleader from early days, including a review on Facebook and recommending to her friends going way back. So thanks, Jess, for all your support you've given for a while, and thanks for signing up on Patreon. If, however, you don't have any money to spare, we'll still give you a shout out if you sign up on my Audible trial. The address there is audibletrial.com/sleepytime. That gives you a free audiobook to keep, as well as a 30-day free trial of Audible, and gives me a little bit of something useful, which is very cool. And if you sign up to it, please let me know so that I can give you a shout out. I don't get any kind of notifications for those. As well as that, you can also listen to the show on Radio Public. That's there. If you use that app on iOS or Android, I get a little something for every listen, and I get a little something for repeat listens. And you get the catnaps and all the regular episodes as well, but they will have advertising attached, so I don't know what advertising you get. Last but absolutely not least, the music that I use is Undesir by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff released under various names that I definitely recommend that you folks check out. And back to what you're actually here for. Thanks for sticking this far. So what exactly is Sleepytime Tales? What is it for? It seems a bit of a strange idea, doesn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this podcast is a tool that is intended to help those it can to get a restful night. Do you find that you lie awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties and stresses of your life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find you can't quite doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. I'm Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has always struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, it was always a struggle for me. I eventually discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to act almost like a sedative for me. I was listening to podcasts at night in bed, and I would find myself waking up halfway through the night and having missed everything that I was trying to listen to. So, after I discovered that there are other podcasts out there for the specific purpose, that for some people, the things that I discovered didn't work. So I thought I'd give it a try and see if I can do something with my droning male voice to help some people get a good night's sleep. So, welcome to Sleepytime Tales. Every episode starts out with this long intro. The main purpose of it is to explain the purpose of the show and the structure to new listeners, and the other reason for it is it's part of the sort of process for a lot of people who've been with me for a while. It's a chance for them to prepare their space and get ready to sleep. Listen to me droning in the background while you brush your teeth and get yourself a glass of water and just make sure that you're settled in and created your space. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. We are trying to build a space together, a nest or something for you to huddle into that protects you in your night. Now, there are probably a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to a sleep podcast, I need something that I can just focus my mind on just closely enough that my brain doesn't sort of spin out of control. I tend to obsess over all sorts of things when I'm trying to sleep, and that's just not going to help at all. So I just need something to focus on just enough that I don't resist the embrace of sleep when it eventually comes. For some people, it might be as simple as just needing something droning in the background, a male voice to function similarly to some people listening to the ocean or wind in the trees or rain. So whichever way works for you, that's what it's for. And if there's something I'm not thinking of, a different way to engage with it, let me know and I'll recommend it to others who may help. So tonight's story is, I was actually supposed to do a mythology episode tonight, but I've been having some internet trouble. So I decided to do a movie review a week early. I'm doing this year's movie, Alita Battle Angel, which was quite an enjoyable sci-fi romp. Definitely something I recommend people check out. It's not the greatest movie ever, but I really did solidly enjoy it. And so I'm going to do a review. Just be warned, there are some spoilers for basically the first half of the movie. It's not a full recap, so I don't go into detail at the back half. But I do talk a little bit about the sort of philosophies of sci-fi and cyberpunk a little bit, which sort of is based on some stuff that maybe happens later in the movie, although I don't go into too much detail. So now, the main thing is that whatever happens, you don't force that sleep. I need you to listen to me telling you tonight's story of Alita Battle Angel, and just keep a light mental grip on the story, and just let sleep come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you'll sleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is very important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on your first night. It probably will take 2 or 3 nights of regularly trying, if you're a new listener, to get this to really work out properly for you. Maybe my accent is strange and it'll take a little bit of getting used to. Maybe one episode isn't long enough. I heard from a listener recently who needs 2 or 3 to get to sleep at night, except for the new sort of my Downton Abbey but more boring report. He said that put him to sleep almost immediately. So, hey, who'd have thought Downton Abbey but boring would be quite effective? So some people need more than one episode. What I do generally is I put the shows on that I listen to, and I just stream them all night. And then when I wake up, my earbuds have fallen out, I pop them back in, and I go back to sleep again. But however you do it, it's very important that you just try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may take a while to work for you. Remember, insomnia is a habit, and we're trying to create new habits. And that takes time and patience. So, like I say, queue up a few episodes, or just run through the backlog, and let my voice waft you to sleep. If you wake up at 3 a.m., just carry on listening, and you'll find yourself falling back asleep again. What I often do is quite an annoying sort of habit that I've developed in the last couple of years is I wake up about an hour, like half an hour or an hour before my alarm goes off. I'm not refreshed, I still need to sleep, but there I am wide awake, and again, I just start listening to my shows and pop my earbuds in, and I sometimes have in that period like the best 30 minutes sleep of the whole night. There's just something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax, and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who's elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. I promise you one thing, and is that you'll always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to help you get some rest, to do a small part to improve your life in a fairly big way. People don't sleep well, and it makes their lives harder, so I'm here to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, help you get some rest and be better able to cope. One thing that's very central for me in this show is the concepts of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you, and I need you to be kind to yourself. Sometimes, no matter what happens, you just can't get to sleep at night, and it's important not to beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the greatest enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a process that we have been pulled away from by stress of life and the progress that we have that shines bright blue lights in our eyes at all hours. So I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Welcome to my movie review of Alita Battle Angel. Please be warned that there will be some spoilers for the story. I'm not doing a full show, or full movie recap, but I will be going into some of the more interesting details and twists and philosophical questions the movie raises. And I'll be going into quite a lot of detail on the sort of first third of the movie. So please be warned, if you're wanting to go in completely fresh, maybe go and check it out. It's definitely well worth your time. First, the basic facts of the movie. Alita Battle Angel is a 2019 American cyberpunk action film. It's based on the manga from the 1990s called Battle Angel Alita by Yukito Kishiro. The movie was directed by Robert Rodriguez, with a script by James Cameron and Nita Kalogridis. The movie grossed $404 million on a budget of $170 million, which, while not exactly a disaster, means it's not likely to get a sequel, which is a bit of a disappointment because it ends, I wouldn't say with a cliffhanger, but it ends with a setup for a very potentially interesting sequel. Ended up in a strong direction, and I'm quite sorry we're not going to see it continued. Maybe those of us who are interested, we're going to have to start reading manga. Despite the slightly disappointing box office, though, it is Robert Rodriguez's highest grossing film. The movie stars Rosa Salazar as the titular Alita. She does mostly voiceover and I presume some motion capture because the character is largely animated, or almost entirely animated, because she doesn't look entirely human, despite the fact that most of the cast are people. The movie also stars Christoph Waltz, Jennifer Connelly, and Mahershala Ali. Reviews for the movie were mixed, with a lot of praise for Salazar's performance and the action scenes of the movie, but a lot of criticism of the screenplay, which, got to tell you, is kind of fair. The movie is a little bit trite. It's very enjoyable and solid, and like I said, it goes in interesting directions. But overall, it's a slightly bland screenplay, although overall, I also did enjoy the movie. The movie starts with a view of a floating city, floating above another city underneath. I don't know if it is, but it looked to me initially a lot like New York Central Park, with the floating city hanging over Central Park and just dumping garbage into the middle of it. Garbage falls constantly into a dump below, and that dump is surrounded by buildings. We see a man, Christoph Waltz, playing Dr. Ido. He's dressed something like Indiana Jones, picking through piles of electronic parts and robot parts. He picks up arms, picks up a robot skull, pulls an eye out of it, puts it in his bag, and is basically looking around, obviously scavenging for useful equipment and technology. He glances over and he sees on a pile of rubbish what looks like the torso of a young teenage girl. Head and neck are mostly intact and a small part of her upper body, but there's not much else left of her. He he scans her with a little handheld scanner, sort of Star Trek-y type, tricorder type thing, and says, "Oh, you're alive." I gotta admit, when he said that, I half expected the eyes on the face to open, but it didn't happen. Despite the comments about the movie being a little bit trite and obvious, sometimes it does avoid the obvious things, so credit for that. It doesn't always do the most obvious. We cut then to what looks like a surgery where Christoph Waltz, with his nurse, who has a robotic arm, are busy mounting the head and torso onto a robot body. The body suits the head of a young girl. It's a slight built girlish body with an artificial skin that looks soft but has quite a pretty little paisley pattern built into it. It looks a bit like a damask, like one color but sort of different sort of shine in the light, angle of the light. One thing I've got to say is quite interesting about the movie as well is there's a sense that it could go quite strong in certain hands in a almost body horror direction. Robert Rodriguez also, as a director, has a history of slightly gory stuff and body horror and horror as well. But he also has a history of making children's movies. He's actually somebody who's a most fascinating career. Started out with a low-budget action movie, El Mariachi, and his career has gone in some very bizarre directions since then. I mean, he's done horror movies with Quentin Tarantino, and he did the Spy Kids movies, so he's someone with a deft touch and a very varied resume of work. So it is entirely possible this movie could go in a body horror direction, but he errs more on the slightly child-friendly side. The depictions of limb replacements and theft that could be quite gruesome and strange are largely antiseptic and mechanical. People's arms get sawed off with saws, but they blow sparks, not blood, sort of thing. There's no real sense of actual physical bodily danger through most of the movie. It takes a little bit of a turn towards the end, but it never gets gory or overly disturbing. I'm someone who doesn't really like gory and disturbing stuff too much, and I wouldn't be sharing it with you and trying to get you to sleep. Something else that often happens in particularly cyberpunky type movies and media is often there's the implication in most of the sci-fi that the more robotic someone becomes, the less human they become. This it's quite common in a lot of cyberpunky stuff from the 80s and 90s. And this is something that Alita almost completely avoids. There is no sense at any point of the movie that any of these cyborgs, some of whom are like Alita, are complete replacements. She is literally just a brain in a jar with a robot body, and others have had limbs replaced and a lot of modification happen. But there's never any sense that their being a cyborg makes them less than human. Some of the cyborgs are bad people, but that's because they're bad people, not because they're not entirely person, isn't it? And some of the cyborgs are good people, and that's just incidental to the fact that they're cyborgs. And some of the bad people are humans. There's a strong sense through the whole thing that people are people, whether they're all human or almost entirely robot. If there's a speck of humanity in them, they are entirely a human being. So this is a credit to, I suppose, the original medium, the original manga, that there's no sort of walking the line there of how human is somebody if they're mostly robot. After the surgery, sorry for that, well, I suppose you're here for the asides, it may help you sleep. After the surgery, we cut to the girl who opens her eyes. Now, something that was noticeable but maybe didn't stand out too much early on when her eyes were closed, but it was a big feature in a lot of the advertising and discussion around the special effects of the movie before, was Alita has really huge eyes. They look unreal. They're almost like bush baby eyes. They are so massive. But they're unreal, but the credit to the art departments, the unreal parts of Alita, and even a lot of the other cyborgs and things that are depicted as well, come across as believable. A lot of sci-fi these days, especially with CGI, sort of tries to stay somewhat realistic, whereas something that's based on a manga and an anime really should go pretty much all in on unrealism, or maybe not unrealism, maybe that's not the right term, but a sort of a sense that things aren't grounded. So Alita's basic design is, at a glance, she does look human, but she's definitely not something ordinary about her. But again, there's never a sense of her look down on it for it. And you quite quickly sort of adjust to what she looks like. Her giant blue eyes sort of become natural and almost invisible, in a sense that you don't notice them anymore. She opens her eyes. She sits up and looks at her hands. She spends a couple of minutes touching her fingers, etc., trying to get a sense of them. She looks around the room. We are in what appears to be a young teenage girl's bedroom, just sitting waiting for a teenage girl to move into it. She gets up, takes a step or two, and falls over quite hard. She gets up, back up again, walks a little bit more carefully, her gait steadies, and she walks up and looks in the mirror. We then see her sneaking down the stairs, where we see Ido and a nurse in a consultation with a person. I wasn't taking any notes while I was watching, but I think he he had had some of his parts stolen by some pickers who basically knock cyborgs out and steal their parts for using them in motorball tournaments, which is a big sport that's a central part of the Alita universe. They finish with a consultation. The man leaves. Alita walks up to Ido, and she openly asks him if she should know them. He says no, they shouldn't. He just found her, and he gave her a body. He asks her if she knows her name. She doesn't. And he says, well, how about you use the name Alita until you learn what yours is? We have a shot of the nurse giving him a bit of a meaningful look, so obviously there's a relevance to the name that he decided to give the strange cyborg girl that he found in the garbage. And we go later to Ido and Alita. They leave the house, leave his surgery. The streets are bustling and full of life, mostly pedestrian traffic. It looks again, make a parallel with Indiana Jones. It looks like a bizarre scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade or something, or Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a very diverse crowd of people going around doing business. Alita, despite not having much memory, does speak, and she recognizes that the people are speaking multiple languages. Ido tells her about the war called the Fall, which was devastating and caused a huge amount of destruction. And on one night, all the floating cities of Earth, except Zalem, the city that's floating above them right now, fell, all in the space of one night. The floating cities were sort of the central parts of the communities, so people came to Zalem as refugees from all over the world. The city below is called the Iron City. Everybody there works for Zalem, or has supports the people who work for Zalem. There is absolutely no kind of social mobility. If you're born on the ground, there's no way to go back up. Obviously, there's hints now towards the sort of social structure of the world that they live in. He leaves Alita outside eating a taco while he goes somewhere, presumably to buy some supplies. A very small, raggedy-looking dog comes and begs from Alita. She bends over, gives him a bite off her taco. A bit gross, I guess. She gives him a bite straight off the taco, doesn't like break a piece off. But of course, she's mostly human, so she doesn't need, well, she's mostly robot rather, so she doesn't need to worry about germs. I guess there's bonuses to that. So yeah, she gives the dog a little bite of a taco. She plays with it a bit, and some posters blow up against her. She picks one up, and she reads that there's a reward for someone who is busy killing human females. There have been 6 victims so far. As she's there's a large, dangerous-looking robot walks up. It looks like the flawed units from RoboCop. Comes up and comes marching through the crowd. It looks quite alarming. It startles her, and not surprisingly, considering the name of the movie is Battle Angel, she immediately goes into a combat stance. So this picture of a tiny little girl ready to go to fight with a multi-legged war robot is quite disconcerting, but it doesn't last very long. She is pulled away by a young man as the robot just walks straight for her. The little dog ends up under the robot trying to dodge its feet, but looking quite alarmed and potentially about to get stepped on. She scoots underneath the robot and grabs the dog and scoots out again. She does some impressive footwork to avoid all the legs. We learn that the robot is called a Centurion. They are intended to keep order. They go around and basically they're the police officers. The young man who grabbed her is Hugo. He acquires stuff for people looking for anything, including Ido, who walks up and greets him. Alita seems extremely fascinated by the young man, but Ido doesn't seem to dislike Hugo, but he doesn't really approve of him. He says something along the lines of, he's a hard worker, and then sort of trails off and tells Alita that they need to go. Ido warns Alita that she mustn't go too far when she leaves the house without him, and that she needs to be back by dark, because it is dangerous out there. We know about the robot cyborgs being stripped for their robot parts now, Obviously, Alita is all cyborg, so lots of parts to be stripping off her. At some point as well, we see a young woman walking through the dark. She's looking a little bit alarmed and scared, wandering the streets alone. But she gets to her house, and then we see something attack her, a sort of scythe-looking object, and then a scream. Alita wakes up in the night as she hears Dr. Ito coming back from being somewhere in the middle of the night. She sees him come, he's favoring his arm, he looks like he's been injured. She doesn't go out and say anything to him, she just keeps an eye and he disappears. The next morning we see his arm is bandaged and strapped up. She asks if everything's okay. He just sort of brushes her off, doesn't really address her concerns. Now, obviously, at this point, we're supposed to be suspicious of Dr. Ito. What is he doing? Is he going and collecting young human women's parts or something? What's going on here? Although I don't know it's too much of a spoiler to say it is a bit of a fake out, and it's a bit of an obvious one. I mean, Dr. Ito is not going to be out there stripping or killing human women. Alita is also starting to get annoyed with being kept in the dark by Ito for things. She's a teenage girl, apparently, so willful and strong, and not a big fan of being kept in the dark, which is entirely understandable. She goes out without Ito during the day. She encounters a woman right outside the surgery who's played by Jennifer Connelly. The woman grabs her hand and looks at it very, very closely. Quite a rude thing to just grab onto a human being without their consent. So Alita's asks her what her problem is, pulls away and storms off. That woman is Dr. Sharon, who is Ito's ex-wife. She's got a sort of bluish-purple stone on her forehead, which we find out is a mark of people from Salem. She and Dr. Ito were partners, working on teams for the motorball, helping create enhanced cyborgs specifically for the competition. We find out that Alita was their daughter's name, and their daughter is dead, and that the body that Alita is walking around in was a body built for their daughter, Alita. So obviously there's some potential daddy-daughter issues, mommy-daughter issues going on here. Sharon wants to return to Salem. She believes that somebody called Vector that she's working with in the motorball tournament is her ticket to get back up there. And she wants Ito to come and carry on working on motorball cyborgs with her, but he is not at all interested. He's happy and satisfied being a doctor for the working class robots, or working class cyborgs in Iron City. Alita finds Hugo, who she'd met earlier, playing a street version of motorball. It's quite a rough and tumble looking game, sort of like a mix of roller derby and football, I guess, or basketball. Actually more roller derby than anything else, to be honest. They're going around, he spots her, he comes and he invites her to join. She obviously is a little bit nervous at first, and she has an encounter with one of Hugo's friends who knocks her off her feet. Hugo gets upset with her because it's her first time. But it's a rough game, and Alita seems not overly concerned about it. Something I forgot to mention earlier, she'd spotted the motorball on TV and had been completely fascinated by it. She was really entranced by it. She was very, very interested. So when she saw them playing it in the streets, it was like a siren song for her. She really wanted to get in and get involved. So she got involved in the game there. She was initially knocked down by Hugo's friend, but she takes to it and gets a little bit of a red mist, I think, and goes after the friend, knocks him out, and scores a point. She goes off with Hugo after the game, and he introduces her to chocolate. And that has become her favorite food, because until then she thought oranges was her favorite food, because that was the first thing she tasted. That was quite a cute little scene early on where Ito gave her an orange to try, and she bit into it with the peel on, not knowing what it was. And it was disgusting, and then he peeled it and gave it to her, and she liked it, obviously. That night, Alita follows Ito when he sneaks out of the house. He seems to be following a young woman in a red hood. The whole Red Riding Hood thing looks a little bit on the nose. She's got this hood and cloak down, and then it looks like almost nothing underneath. There's like a long, just her legs sticking out underneath, as though she's almost naked underneath. He hides behind a wall and holds up a scythe-looking thing, which at first glance looks a bit like the scythe we saw when the young woman was killed earlier, but is actually not very much like it. Interesting enough, this one has a rocket engine on it, obviously to help make swings a lot stronger. But as he's about to swing for the woman who's around the corner, Alita jumps down and interrupts him. He looks around the corner and she has disappeared. He realizes that they were in a trap. A huge male-presenting cyborg pops up the alley behind them, and another one comes in front of them, also male, more regular human size. This one has a large scythe, looking a lot more like the scythe that was involved with the young woman who was killed earlier. We find out that the woman that Alita thought Ito was going to murder is also a cyborg, and they were part of a gang that's going around and killing people. They hunt for human women, a gang of serial killers. Ito is held fast by the large cyborg called Kruishka, while Alita fights the smaller ones. She basically takes out the male one with the scythe almost immediately, and then gets into a major fight with the female. This is the first real action scene of the movie, and it bodes well for the rest of the movie. The action is very clear, very concise. These cyborgs do things that human beings couldn't possibly do, but it also seem believable. Like they move in a way that seems to fit with physics. It's not like watching a wire work in a Hong Kong movie or anything like that. It's a very, very good fight scene. It gets quite vicious, and Alita basically kills the female cyborg. The large cyborg drops Ito and attacks Alita. It also becomes a very major fight, and while it's happening, Alita has a flashback, a memory of being in a battle on the moon. She jumps up and basically kicks Kruishka's arm off, and he flees. Kruishka goes to the lab where Dr. Shiren is attending them. She, as we know now, works on the motorball robots, and looks like motorball cyborgs. I really should try not to do that. As well as working on, looks like petty criminals and stuff for Vector, who has cyborgs running errands for him. A voice speaks through Kruishka because she finds a chip basically built into his brain that goes in two directions. And we find out that there is a person in Salem who's behind pretty much everything that goes on, called Nova. Vector makes a comment about the man in charge, the eyes behind the eyes. And then suddenly Nova speaks through Vector as well, and we find out that Vector also has whatever the implant is that Kruishka has. Alita finds out that her heart, which is part of her core, is a technology that hasn't functioned in something like 300 years. It's an antimatter reactor from before the war. The body that she's in was initially built for Ito's wheelchair-bound daughter. He had built it for her, but before she got to use it, she was killed by a cyborg that he had worked on for the motorball. The cyborg was addicted to painkillers and had broken into his lab to steal some, and when the cyborg charged for the door, the daughter was in the way and he knocked her over and she couldn't get out of the way. So in revenge for what happened, he became a hunter-warrior, which is what they call the bounty hunters. I've got to say, I'm not overly fond of that particular name for the bounty hunters in this. Hunter-warrior, that just sounds, I don't know, there's just something about it I don't like. It doesn't roll nasty, sort of. There's an implication in the name that there's sort of something noble about them, but it's really, they're just bounty hunters. He became a hunter-warrior. He registered as one. For revenge, he wanted to go after the cyborg that killed his daughter. And then he has since carried on working as a hunter warrior because his clinic wasn't making any money, and the only way to keep it open was to get bounties by hunting down criminals. Ido seems to know more, but he won't tell her more about Alita. He just tells her that she's ancient technology, so she's probably about 300 years old. Later on, Alita goes with Hugo and his friends, the crew of people who by this point we know steal cyborg parts. They go on a trip outside of the city. He's trying to help her get her memory back. He knows that she connects with things from the past, or she seems to get some memories. And they go to a starship which is sitting in a large flooded hole in the ground. The starship hasn't been stripped for parts because the technology is from the Mars colonies, the United Republics of Mars. And those technologies are not compatible with anything that they use, so there's no point in stealing it. Alita knows that her heart is technology, so she dives down to try to find a way inside the ship. She finds a hole, she goes inside, and she finds that the ship seems to be responding to her. It's like there's an identity code or something that she's giving off that the ship recognizes. She finds a glowing orb, which opens up, and she finds a cyborg body, which she feels drawn to. We flash back to a training scene where she's fighting with another cyborg that looks a lot like her. It took me a while to realize the voice for it was Michelle Rodriguez. It looks a lot like Michelle Rodriguez, but the larger eyes and the slightly different face shape threw me off. It was only later on I realized I recognized the voice and part of the facial structure. They're going to be attacking Zalem, and their main target is Nova, who we now know is behind everything in Zalem. So this Nova person has been around for 300 plus years. She gets the body out of the ship and brings it out. They go back to the surgery where Ido refuses to change the body. He tells her it's a berserker, which is designed for Mars soldiers like her. She is drawn to violence, and which is why she's so fascinated by motorball and getting into fights. And he is scared of the consequences of giving her a berserker body if she loses control. She storms out because, again, teenage girl does not being told what to do. And she signs up as a hunter warrior. And she goes to a bar for hunter warriors because she wants to try and get them to work together against Gruishka. I've got to say, this part of the movie doesn't really make much sense to me. In a lot of ways, I've been watching some anime lately, and it's very anime. It's almost as though something didn't quite make translation. She goes into this bar with the hunter warriors. She's this new girl, hasn't even got a single kill, and tries to get them all to sort of talks about them as being heroes and trying to get them to work together against a common enemy when there's nothing in the text to suggest that that would ever possibly work. There is a hunter warrior that they'd encountered earlier called Zapan. He's all robot except for his face, which is very human looking and looks like he's had a lot of care taken for it. He and Alita start taunting each other. She teases him about spending all of his money looking after his pretty face. And also none of the other hunter warriors are interested in working against Gruishka, who doesn't have a bounty on him. They don't get into fights for no reason. And although there should be a bounty on Gruishka because he is a criminal, but for some reason nothing's been made, so he's obviously connected and protected. We know that he's protected by Nova and Vector, but they don't, but they know there's a bad sign. Zapan and Alita's argument becomes the major bar fight, which is pretty fantastic. A really, really good scene. But then Gruishka comes and charges into the bar. None of the other hunter warriors are interested at all in getting involved. Zapan says, take her, she's fine. He takes his sword, which incidentally, we find out at some point, was actually an sword. It's a Martian sword. So Alita's also drawn towards it. The little dog that she'd fed earlier reappeared and followed her into the bar, and it's the only thing that stands up to Gruishka and starts barking at him. And he kills it gruesomely. You don't see anything, but the dog dies. You do see its blood, which Alita wipes on her under her eyes. You'll see in a lot of the artwork for the movie, she's got bars under her eyes. That's the dog's blood. They get into a bit of a fight. Grishka goes underground and taunts Alita to follow him, which she does. Again, we have a huge fight with a very impressive action scene. Grishka's got this weapon that shoots all of his fingers out and on chains. My wife actually, now, as I said, Alita is initially a manga, but there was also one season of an anime. And my wife has watched it, and she said she was a little bit concerned about some of the fight scenes because some of the stuff wouldn't translate too well to quote-unquote live action, although I don't know how live action you can actually call a movie like this. The weapon is a very cool sort of thing that shoots out, and ultimately Alita's body gets sliced into pieces because while her body she was built was a very strong one, it was just designed for a teenage girl. It's not like a war machine. It's sliced to pieces and only the torso and a single arm remains. She stands on the arm, Grishka attacks her, and she ends up doing a spin and jamming her arm in his eye socket. Hugo comes through and hits Grishka with a firebomb, and then one of the other hunter warriors in the bar I didn't mention was played by Jeff Fahey. His specialization is robot dogs, so like 5, and he didn't like seeing a dog get killed, so these 5 robot dogs attack Grishka and chase him off. Obviously at this point Ido relents about installing the berserker body. He realizes that trouble's going to find Alita no matter what happens, and she's going to have to look after herself, and it's a lot easier than trying to build a whole new one from scratch anyway. He installs her into the berserker body, which basically completely reforms itself. It was quite a large looking body, but it forms into a not quite as small teenage girl body as the one that she'd had. It was more adult shaped. The whole thing is built out of nanotechnology, so it's a lot of sort of tricks and stuff that it does. He does warn her that if anything happens to it, he can't repair it, it's beyond him. She wants to get to Salem to go after Nova, because during the fight as well, Nova spoke to her through Grishka, so she realized that the fight that she started was sent to 300 years ago is not over. She wants to go to Salem after Nova. The way they find out to happen is to become a Motorball champion of champions, and that person can go up. There's almost no other way to go up. And that's pretty much all I'm going to go into for this. That's about the first half of the movie. Some interesting twist and turn happens from here. If you do never even watch the movie, I definitely recommend watching the Motorball scene on YouTube. The whole thing was released as a trailer. A very entertaining scene. I definitely recommend taking a look at it. And that's that. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around the bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.